Clara, Emily, and Sarah appeared to be three ordinary sisters living in a quiet neighborhood, but behind their innocent smiles and perfect family image hid a secret so dark and twisted it would eventually destroy everything around them. Their stepbrother Jason was at the center of it all, pulling them into a web of forbidden obsession, jealousy, and violence that would soon spiral into one of the most shocking true crime cases the town had ever witnessed. The three sisters, Anna, Clara, and Rose, lived in a quiet neighborhood where every house looked alike and every family seemed to follow the same pattern of ordinary life. From the outside, their world appeared calm and uneventful, but inside their home, something was brewing that no one would have imagined. Their mother had remarried a man who had a teenage son named Michael from his previous marriage. At first, the blending of two families seemed harmless, even hopeful, as the parents envisioned a stronger household with children who could grow up together like real siblings. But in reality, the arrival of Michael changed everything in ways that no one could foresee. Michael was older than the sisters, and from the moment he entered the house, his presence carried a kind of strange authority. He wasn't just another boy. He had the kind of charm that drew attention, the type of personality that could pull people in without effort. Anna, the oldest sister, noticed him first. She admired how different he was from the boys she knew at school. Clara, the middle sister, followed closely after, captivated by his confidence. Rose, the youngest, saw him through the eyes of someone desperate for belonging and attention. Slowly, quietly, their bond with him grew stronger until he became the center of their private world. At first, their closeness seemed innocent. They spent time together when their parents were out, played games, watched movies, and talked late into the night. Their mother worked long shifts, sometimes overnight, while their stepfather often traveled for his job. This left the children unsupervised for hours, even days, and in that void, boundaries began to disappear. The sisters leaned on Michael for companionship, and Michael, in turn, encouraged the attention they gave him. The connection deepened beyond what anyone thought possible between siblings, step or otherwise. Anna became protective of her time with him. She would arrange to sit near him, eager to claim him in ways that no one else could see. Clara followed closely, unwilling to let her older sister have him to herself. Rose, although younger, was not blind to the growing tension. She too found herself wanting his attention, not out of competition, but from a longing she couldn't explain. What started as playfulness evolved into something secretive, and secrets have a way of binding people together while also pulling them into danger. The house became a space where shadows grew longer. At night, when the world outside was quiet, the sisters found themselves sneaking around corners, drawn to the forbidden. Michael encouraged it in subtle ways, making each of them feel chosen, special, and different from the others. They didn't see the manipulation at first. To them, it felt like belonging, like being part of something thrilling that no one else could understand. The secrecy fueled the intensity, and soon they were trapped in a web of obsession. As time passed, they began creating rituals that only they knew about. A glance at the dinner table, a hidden note slipped between books, a late-night signal from the hallway, all these small gestures tied them together. The sisters carried their secret in silence, each believing it was something precious they had to guard. But with every passing week, the secrecy grew heavier. What once felt exciting turned into a dangerous weight pressing down on their young minds. Anna started keeping a journal, documenting moments she shared with Michael, writing down her emotions in a way that revealed her growing attachment. Clara, who discovered the journal by accident, read it in secret, and instead of being repulsed, she felt even more determined to carve out her own place in the hidden bond. Rose, too young to understand everything at first, followed the lead of her older sisters, convinced that this was the only way to keep the family tied together. The tension among them was invisible to their parents, who believed they had created a stable home. Their mother, exhausted from work, never noticed the lingering stares or the nervous energy that filled the room when she entered. Their stepfather, more focused on his career than his children, assumed that the blended family had adjusted well. Neither of them realized that the very walls of the house were holding onto a secret that was eating away at the lives of their children. The longer this continued, the more dangerous it became. The sisters began to change in subtle ways. At school, they were distracted, often daydreaming, unable to focus on their studies. Teachers noticed their unusual closeness to each other, as if they were guarding something that no one else could touch. Friends invited them out less and less, tired of their refusal to let anyone inside their private circle. Slowly, the sisters became isolated, tied only to each other and to Michael. Jealousy began to surface in small cracks. Anna resented Clara when she noticed her spending too much time with Michael. Clara grew bitter toward Rose, thinking the youngest was stealing moments meant for her. Rose, in turn, felt overshadowed by her older sisters, believing she had to fight harder to hold Michael's attention. What once united them began to divide them, yet none of them dared to speak about it openly. The fear of exposure kept them silent, and in that silence, their obsession grew deeper. Every lie they told to protect their secret drew them further away from reality. They created alibis for each other, explained away suspicious behavior, and invented stories to keep their parents distracted. The bond between the sisters and their stepbrother was no longer a simple secret, it was a double life. They were children living in two worlds, the ordinary family that neighbors saw and the hidden darkness that consumed them behind closed doors. The house itself seemed to carry the weight of their actions. Every room held memories they could not escape. Every corner felt like a witness to what they had done. At night, the silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of footsteps moving carefully through the hallway. Their hearts raced at every creak of the floorboards, terrified of being caught, yet unable to stop. The sisters believed they were bound together forever, that their secret was something no one would ever discover. But the deeper they sank into their obsession, the more fragile their world became. Secrets like theirs could not stay hidden forever. And though they didn't know it yet, the cracks were already forming. One mistake, one slip of the tongue, one curious observer, and everything would come crashing down. The story of Anna, Clara, Rose, and Michael had only just begun, but already their lives were spinning out of control. What seemed like a thrilling bond would soon unravel into something far darker than any of them could have imagined. The sisters' secret with Michael grew heavier with each passing day, and yet the pull of it was too strong to resist. Anna, Clara, and Rose carried the weight in silence, bound by the knowledge that no one could ever find out. On the outside, their lives continued as though nothing had changed. They went to school, ate dinner with their family, and maintained the illusion of a normal household. But beneath that thin layer of ordinary life, the reality was unraveling. The secrecy turned their days into a constant balancing act, where every move had to be carefully planned and every word chosen with precision. One mistake could bring the whole fragile arrangement crashing down. At first, they thought they could handle it. Anna believed her maturity gave her control, that she could manage the risks and keep everyone safe. Clara thought her cleverness would shield her from suspicion. Rose believed her youth made her invisible, that no one would ever suspect her of anything. But the truth was that none of them were prepared for the strain. The secret began to seep into their behavior in ways they didn't notice, but others soon did. At school, Anna's teachers began to question her sudden lack of focus. She had once been ambitious, determined to graduate with strong grades, but now her assignments were rushed, her answers vague, and her concentration shattered. Clara, usually confident, grew defensive when asked simple questions, as though every conversation might expose her. Rose, once friendly, became withdrawn, pushing away friends who had been close to her for years. To outsiders, it looked like normal teenage struggles, but to those who looked closer, there was a tension around the girls that could not easily be explained. At home, the atmosphere was equally strange. Their mother, exhausted from her long hours at work, overlooked the odd silences and the nervous glances exchanged at the dinner table. She assumed it was normal sibling rivalry, the kind that came with blending to families together. Their stepfather, more focused on his travels and career, paid little attention at all. This gave the sisters and Michael freedom to continue their hidden lives, but freedom only fed their obsession. Nights became darker, and their behavior more reckless. The secrecy created invisible walls in the house. Certain rooms carried memories that no one spoke of, but all of them remembered. The hallway felt like a passageway of unspoken tension. Even the kitchen, once the heart of the home, became a place where silence lingered too heavily. Every space seemed tainted by what they had done, and yet they kept returning, unable to let go of the dangerous bond. Jealousy soon became impossible to ignore. Anna, the oldest, felt entitled to Michael's attention, believing her age made her the rightful one to have him closest. Clara, sharp and calculating, saw Anna's claim as weak and fought for her own place beside him. Rose, though younger, refused to step aside, believing she had as much right as her sisters to the secret they were keeping. The rivalry grew quiet but sharp, with subtle battles fought in shadows. A door locked at the right moment, a glance exchanged at the wrong time, a sudden excuse to keep another sister away. Each act was small, but each one deepened the cracks in their bond. Still, they tried to present a united front. To the outside world, they appeared unusually close, a trio of sisters who rarely let anyone else into their circle. Neighbors noticed they never brought friends home. Teachers wondered why the sisters seemed uninterested in relationships outside of school. It became a running joke among some classmates that the sisters lived in their own world. No one imagined how true that statement was. The more the sisters hid, the more isolated they became. Michael encouraged the secrecy, enjoying the control he held over them. He understood how much they depended on him, and he used it to his advantage. With a few words, he could spark jealousy between them. With a small gesture, he could make one feel chosen and another rejected. The sisters, blinded by obsession, didn't see the manipulation clearly. To them, the secrecy felt like proof of loyalty, like a dangerous treasure they were guarding together. But cracks were beginning to show. One night, Clara made a mistake. In a rush of anger, she wrote in her notebook about her feelings for Michael, a raw and dangerous confession that she left carelessly under her bed. Rose found it while looking for something else. Instead of hiding it, she read every word. For Rose, the discovery only confirmed what she already suspected, that Clara wanted more than her fair share. The rivalry deepened, but so did the danger, because now there was written proof of the secret they thought could never be revealed. Anna, meanwhile, noticed her sisters pulling away from each other. The bond that once made them feel powerful was now making them paranoid. They feared betrayal from within, each wondering if the others might break under the weight of the truth. The house became a place of tension so thick that even their parents began to feel uneasy without knowing why. Their mother noticed the sisters whispering to each other more often, stopping suddenly when she entered the room. Their stepfather sensed the distance but dismissed it as teenage moodiness. Neither of them realized how close the truth was to spilling out. Outside the house, whispers began to spread. Neighbors saw Michael leaving the home late at night, sometimes followed by one of the sisters. People noticed how none of the girls seemed interested in boys their own age, yet seemed consumed by something no one could name. Whispers turned into suspicion, and suspicion grew louder. The family's perfect facade was beginning to crumble, though the sisters still believed they could keep everything hidden. Each night, they told themselves they were safe. They reassured one another that no one would ever find out. But deep down, they knew the truth. Secrets like theirs could not stay buried forever. One slip, one misplaced word, one curious observer, and everything would unravel. The tension built like a storm, gathering strength, invisible but unstoppable. The sisters clung to the belief that their secret made them special, that their connection to Michael was something unique and unbreakable. But what they didn't see was how their obsession was slowly destroying them, piece by piece. What once felt like a bond was now a trap, and the walls around them were closing in. The outside world was watching more closely than they realized, and the first signs of exposure were already beginning to show. The unraveling began with a single crack, and from there the secret spread like a fracture in glass that could not be stopped. Rose, the youngest, was the first to buckle under the weight. Her guilt had been growing for months, eating away at her until it felt unbearable. She could no longer focus at school, her hands shook when she tried to write, and her nights were spent lying awake, haunted by what she and her sisters were hiding. Finally, one afternoon, in a moment of desperation, she confided in a friend. She thought it would bring her relief, but instead it marked the beginning of the end. Her friend listened in shock, at first believing it was an exaggerated story born from teenage drama. But the details Rose whispered were too specific, too raw to be dismissed as fantasy. Within hours, the friend told her parents, unable to keep such a disturbing confession to herself. From there, the information spread quietly but quickly. The parents confided in a neighbor, who added pieces of gossip they had long suspected but never voiced. What started as a private confession turned into whispers that ran through the town like wildfire. At school, the sisters noticed the way people looked at them had changed. Classmates whispered behind their backs. Teachers exchanged worried glances when the sisters walked by. Even those who knew nothing about the details sensed that something was terribly wrong. Anna and Clara blamed Rose for the sudden shift, though they never confronted her directly. The tension among them grew sharper, and what had once been silent jealousy now turned into silent accusations. Each sister carried her guilt differently, Anna with anger, Clara with suspicion, Rose with fear. Soon the rumors reached the ears of someone who decided action had to be taken. An anonymous tip was sent to the authorities, describing suspicious behavior in the family home. At first, police hesitated, unsure how much weight to give to what could have been dismissed as malicious gossip. But when more than one person stepped forward with similar concerns, an investigation was quietly opened. The sisters had no idea that the walls were closing in around them. The police began by observing the house. Neighbors were interviewed, and their testimonies raised more questions. Several had seen Michael leaving at strange hours of the night, sometimes accompanied by one of the sisters. Others recalled how the girls never had boyfriends, never brought friends over, and seemed unusually protective of one another. Alone, these details meant little. Together, they painted a picture that matched the whispers. The investigators knew they had to dig deeper. One day, without warning, officers arrived at the school. The sisters were called out of class separately, each escorted to a private room where questions awaited them. Anna tried to remain calm, insisting she knew nothing about the rumors. Clara grew defensive, demanding to know who had spoken against them. Rose, already fragile, broke down under the pressure, her tears confirming what investigators had already begun to suspect. Though she never gave a full confession, her silence and trembling told more than her words ever could. The search of their home revealed evidence that left no room for doubt. Hidden in Anna's bedroom was her journal, filled with entries that described moments and feelings that could not be explained away as imagination. Claire's notebook, left carelessly on her desk, carried similar confessions, masked as stories but too personal to deny. Photographs were discovered, private images that confirmed the truth beyond question. What the sisters thought was hidden forever had been documented by their own hands. When their mother was told, she collapsed into disbelief. She had worked long hours to provide for her family, and in that absence, she had trusted her children to be safe. Now she learned that the home she believed was secure had become the stage for a secret that shocked even the investigators. Their stepfather reacted with rage, unable to understand how such things had happened under his roof. But the evidence was undeniable, and the authorities moved quickly to remove the children from the home. The news spread across the town like a storm. What had been whispers turned into headlines, and soon every neighbor, every teacher, every passerby knew the story. The sisters went from being quiet girls on the block to the center of one of the most disturbing scandals anyone could remember. Families kept their children away, the school buzzed with gossip, and the family name became tainted beyond repair. Michael was arrested first, taken away in handcuffs while neighbors stood in the street and watched. Some shouted in anger, others remained silent in shock. The sisters were placed in protective custody, separated from one another, each kept under close watch while investigators continued to gather evidence. Their once unbreakable bond was now shattered by fear and betrayal. In the days that followed, the sisters were interrogated again and again. Anna clung to her defiance, refusing to admit what she knew was already proven. Clara wavered, sometimes denying, sometimes hinting at the truth, depending on the pressure she felt. Rose, crushed by guilt, confessed in fragments, her words stumbling out between tears. The investigators pieced together their testimonies, creating a story that revealed the full scope of what had happened in the house. The more they uncovered, the darker the story became. What outsiders once thought was simply a quiet family was exposed as a household ruled by secrecy and obsession. The sisters, once united in their hidden world, were now divided, each struggling to protect herself in the face of overwhelming evidence. Michael, meanwhile, denied everything, claiming the sisters had invented the story out of jealousy and imagination. But with journals, photographs, and testimony, his denials fell flat. The town, once quiet and unsuspecting, became consumed by the scandal. Local media swarmed the case, reporters standing outside the family home, eager for every detail. Headlines painted the sisters as both victims and participants, fueling debates that tore through the community. Some saw them as manipulated children, too young to understand the full weight of what had happened. Others viewed them as complicit, old enough to know right from wrong, and guilty of their own choices. The sisters' lives were no longer their own. Every word they had ever written, every glance they had ever shared with Michael, was now dissected by strangers. Their secret world, once so private and powerful, had been dragged into the light and turned into something horrifying. They were no longer sisters united by silence. They were individuals, separated by walls, interrogations, and the heavy hand of the law. The cracks that had started with Rose's confession had split wide open, and there was no way to close them again. The investigation had only begun, and the trial that followed would expose even more. The sisters' secret, once hidden in the shadows of their home, was now a crime written across the town for everyone to see. The trial became the stage where every secret was stripped bare, every hidden truth dragged into the light for the world to see. The courtroom was filled with tension from the very first day, as the three sisters were brought in separately, their faces pale, their eyes heavy with the weight of what they carried. Michael sat at the defense table, guarded by officers, his expression cold and unreadable. For the first time, the family that once lived under one roof faced each other across a divide of law, judgment, and shame. Prosecutors wasted no time presenting their case. They painted Michael as a manipulative figure who had used his position in the family to gain control over the sisters. They detailed the journals found in Anna's bedroom, the notebook in Clara's desk, the fragments of confession from Rose. Each piece of evidence was laid out for the jury like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper into the image of the family. The photographs, shown only to the jury and not to the public, were described in chilling detail. No one in the room could escape the reality of what they revealed. The sisters' testimonies were the most shocking of all. Anna was called first. She walked to the stand with stiff movements, her hands trembling as she swore to tell the truth. Her words came slowly, each sentence heavy with defiance and shame. She admitted to the relationship, but she insisted it was something she had chosen, something she believed was real. Her testimony left the courtroom in silence, the jurors stunned by the rawness of her confession. Clara followed, her words less steady, her emotions swinging between anger and despair. She admitted enough to confirm the prosecutor's case but also tried to protect herself, claiming she had been influenced more than she had chosen. Rose was last, and her tears flowed openly as she spoke. Her testimony was fragmented, her sentences broken by sobs, but her honesty struck the jury harder than anything else. She admitted she had wanted Michael's attention, that she had competed with her sisters, but she also confessed she had been too young to understand the consequences. The defense tried to shift the story. Michael's lawyers argued that the sisters had exaggerated, that they were jealous of each other and had spun fantasies into accusations. They claimed the journals were the inventions of troubled teenagers, writing down desires that had never truly happened. They pointed to Anna's defiance as proof that she had pursued Michael, not the other way around. They painted Michael as a victim of lies, trapped by the stories of three young women desperate for attention. But the weight of the evidence crushed their defense at every turn. Witnesses from the neighborhood were brought in. Neighbors testified about seeing Michael sneaking out late at night, sometimes with one of the sisters. Teachers described how the girls had grown distant, distracted, and withdrawn over the years. Friends recalled strange behaviors, excuses made to avoid spending time with others, and the odd way the sisters always seemed to guard one another. Every testimony added another layer to the growing picture of a family consumed by a secret too disturbing to ignore. The public reaction was explosive. Newspapers printed every detail they could legally share, and television reporters filled the airwaves with updates from the courtroom. The case divided opinion sharply. Some people saw the sisters as manipulated victims who had been failed by their parents and preyed upon by Michael. Others saw them as active participants, insisting they had chosen their actions and should face consequences of their own. The debate spread far beyond the small town, turning the case into a national scandal that stirred anger, pity, and disbelief. Inside the courtroom, the sister's mother sat through every session, her face etched with grief. She listened to her daughter's testimonies with tears streaming down her face, unable to reconcile the children she had raised with the shocking stories unfolding before her. Their stepfather, once full of fury, sat in silence, his jaw clenched, unable to look at his son without rage boiling in his eyes. Their marriage, already strained, cracked under the weight of the trial, leaving them distant and broken even before the verdict was reached. The jurors listened to weeks of testimony, evidence, and argument, their expressions growing heavier with each passing day. The sisters' words lingered in their minds, as did the journals and photographs. They saw the contradictions, the confusion, and the complexity of the case. But above all, they saw the undeniable proof that lines had been crossed, that what happened inside that home was not ordinary, not harmless, and not something that could be ignored. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor spoke with grim certainty. They described the years of secrecy, the manipulation, the destruction of trust within the family. They reminded the jury that these were children when the relationship began, children who had been failed by the adults who should have protected them. The defense countered with claims of exaggeration, insisting the sisters' words were not to be trusted, that they had invented or embellished the truth. They asked the jury to see doubt where the prosecution demanded certainty. The jury deliberated for hours, then days. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, waiting for the decision. Reporters stood ready, cameras aimed, prepared to announce the outcome that would decide the fate of Michael and shape the rest of the sisters' lives. Inside, the sisters sat in separate rooms, each haunted by the knowledge that their secrets were no longer their own. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom was packed with onlookers. The air was thick with tension, every eye fixed on the jury as they delivered their decision. Michael was found guilty on multiple charges, including abuse, coercion, and corruption of minors. The words struck the room like thunder, leaving silence in their wake. Michael sat motionless, his expression hardened, while the sisters trembled under the weight of what had just been decided. The sentencing would come later, but the trial had already destroyed whatever was left of the family. Their mother wept openly, her sobs echoing through the courtroom. Their stepfather sat in stony silence, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. The sisters were escorted out separately, each of them carrying scars that no verdict could erase. The trial had done more than convict Michael. It had exposed every hidden corner of the family's life, tearing down the illusion of normalcy and leaving only the wreckage of betrayal and obsession. The sisters, once bound together by their dangerous secret, were now bound only by the public's judgment and their own haunted memories. The case became one of the most disturbing trials the town had ever witnessed. It left behind questions that could never fully be answered, wounds that would never fully heal, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest crimes happen where no one dares to look inside the walls of a family home. The sentencing day arrived with a heavy air that hung over the courthouse like a storm waiting to break. The trial had already consumed the lives of everyone involved, but this final step carried a sense of finality. It was no longer about uncovering the truth or debating guilt. That had already been decided. Now it was about punishment, justice, and consequences that would echo for the rest of their lives. Michael entered the courtroom in shackles, his head held high despite the weight of what he faced. The sisters were brought in separately, each sitting apart, their faces pale and drained of all emotion. They no longer looked like the inseparable trio who once lived in secrecy. Instead, they appeared broken, disconnected, and fragile, as though the bond that once defined them had been cut into pieces that could never be mended. Their mother sat in the audience, unable to hold back her tears, while their stepfather remained stoic, his anger bottled inside, his disappointment carved into the lines of his face. The prosecutor spoke first, urging the judge to deliver a sentence that reflected the gravity of Michael's crimes. They recounted the years of secrecy, the manipulation, and the damage inflicted on the sisters. They described how innocence had been twisted into obsession, how the girls' lives had been pulled into something they could never escape. They argued that Michael had stolen not just their childhood but their ability to trust, to build healthy lives, to see themselves without shame. The prosecutor's voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of destruction that could not be undone. The defense tried to argue for leniency, claiming Michael had grown up in a broken home, that he himself had been a victim of neglect and poor parenting. They painted him as a young man who had made mistakes, who had been pulled into something he did not fully understand. But the courtroom had already heard enough during the trial. The jury's verdict had spoken loudly, and the defense's pleas sounded hollow against the mountain of evidence. The judge listened in silence, his expression stern, his eyes betraying the heavy burden of his responsibility. When the time came, he addressed the courtroom with a voice that cut through the silence. He spoke of betrayal, of manipulation, and of the destruction of trust that should never have been broken. He spoke of the sisters, their lost innocence, and the years of healing they would need. Then he delivered the sentence, decades in prison, with no chance of early release. Michael sat motionless, his expression unchanging, though his hands clenched tightly in his lap. The weight of the decision had finally fallen, and there was no escape. For the sisters, The sentence brought no relief. They were spared criminal charges, as the court recognized their youth and the manipulation they had endured. But freedom did not mean peace. They were placed under strict supervision, with mandatory counseling and limited contact with one another. The very bond that had once tied them together was now considered dangerous, a reminder of everything they had lost. The court ruled that they were not to live together again, each placed in separate care to rebuild their lives away from the shadow of their shared past. The family home, once filled with laughter and the illusions of normalcy, stood empty. Their mother could not bear to remain in the house where so much had been hidden, where every room held a memory that cut too deep. She packed her belongings in silence, leaving behind the place she once thought was safe. Their stepfather moved out soon after, the collapse of their marriage inevitable. Neither could look at the home without seeing the secrets that had destroyed it. The community that once embraced them turned its back. Neighbors whispered when the mother walked past, their eyes filled with judgment. Former friends avoided her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The sisters, though kept apart, carried reputations that followed them wherever they went. At school, their names were whispered in hallways. On the streets, strangers stared. Their lives were no longer their own, consumed by a story that the world refused to forget. Each sister tried to cope in her own way. Anna withdrew completely, her once strong personality crumbling into isolation. She refused to speak in therapy, refusing to relive the memories that haunted her. Clara struggled with anger, lashing out at counselors and guardians, unable to forgive herself or her siblings. Rose carried the heaviest burden of guilt, believing that her confession had destroyed everything, though deep down she knew the secret could never have stayed hidden forever. Their paths diverged, but each of them carried the same shadow, a weight that could not be lifted by time alone. Michael, behind bars, became just another inmate in a system filled with broken lives. Yet even in prison, his story followed him. Guards and inmates alike knew who he was, what he had done. His crime carried a mark that could never be erased, a label that stripped away any sense of power he once held. In the silence of his cell, he had only his own memories to keep him company, reminders of the control he once wielded and the destruction it had left behind. The case continued to linger in the public consciousness long after the trial ended. Documentaries were made, articles written, debates held about who was to blame and how such a thing could have happened unnoticed for so long. Some called it a story of manipulation, others a story of obsession. But everyone agreed it was a tragedy. It stood as a chilling reminder of how secrets can fester in the shadows, how a family can look perfect on the outside while hiding a darkness no one suspects. The sisters, though spared prison, would never truly escape. Every attempt to rebuild their lives was haunted by the past. Jobs turned them away when their names were recognized. Relationships collapsed when the truth came out. They carried scars invisible to the eye but heavy on the heart. No matter how far they ran, the story followed them, a constant reminder of a childhood stolen by secrecy and betrayal. Their mother lived in silence, moving far away to escape the whispers. She never forgave herself for not seeing the truth, for not protecting her children. Their stepfather disappeared entirely, unable to face the shame. The family that once stood together was shattered into pieces, scattered across different places, bound only by a history too painful to acknowledge. In the end, the story of the three sisters and their stepbrother was remembered not just as a crime but as a cautionary tale. It revealed how fragile trust can be, how quickly innocence can be stolen, and how deeply secrets can destroy. The verdict may have locked Michael away, but the true sentence was carried by the sisters, who would live the rest of their lives in the shadow of what had happened. It was a crime that began in silence, grew in secrecy, and ended in destruction. A story that showed the darkest truths often hide in the most ordinary homes, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be concealed. For the sisters, the past could never be undone, and the future would always carry the mark of the secret they once shared.